Fun from my perspective politically, terrible from your perspective and my perspective as a citizen, but boy, we had some fun with that in the political aspect of it. The session is 45 days, and things pop up early on. We knew all along we had to deal with the budget. We knew that we were going to be dealing with immigration. Immigration had been talked about for months, right? Nobody knew anything about GRAMA. I mean, GRAMA is a book. It's called, it's a statute that's on the books. It's called Government Records Access Management Act. And it's basically sets up the procedure by which citizens or the media can get access to records of public officials. Our letters back and forth to each other, any emails or text messages, things like that. It's the way that citizens and the media have to get down into what's actually going on behind the scenes and find out, look, are there any deals being made that we weren't aware of? Or remember that $13 million that UDOT paid out to the contractor for that information came to light through a GRAMA request from the media. They said, we want you guys up to the legislature and the governor's office to produce to us records relating to this big road project down in Utah County. And consequently, all the folks at the Legislative Research and General Counsel's office went through hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of documents and said, okay, let's find all the documents that are requested by the media in this GRAMA request, and we'll produce it. They did. The media went through and said, hey, what's this 13 million? And everybody went, what 13 million? And so that came to light, and GRAMA's a great thing. Especially it's a great thing in a state where 75% of the legislators are from one party. I mean, it's not an exaggeration on my part when I tell you I will go home sometimes when we're in session and turn on the TV at 10 o'clock and Channel 5 or whatever channel I'm watching will say, today the legislature did this. And I went, and I go, I was up there. I don't recall that. I think I was up there. Wasn't I up there, Allison? Yeah, you were up there. Well, I don't remember that. And then I'll find out it's because the reporter is talking about something that happened in the Republican caucus in the House. A vote that was taken in the Republican caucus in the House. And you know what? They're correct in saying that's what happened in the legislature, because what a majority of the Republican caucus in the House decides to do, if it's a caucus position, that's what we do. We have so few Democrats up there. So in a state where you have such a supermajority of Republicans, you've got to have a strong, vigorous, aggressive media to keep those folks honest. We try and do it as Democrats. There are things we can say and do to, make them toe the line. But there are so many things that happen behind the scenes without a good, strong GRAMA law. We're going to have real problems in this state. So, I'm in Democratic leadership. I meet with the governor when the session's going on. We meet with the governor. The four of us who are in Democratic leadership in the House meet with the governor on a weekly basis. We meet with our counterparts in Republican House leadership every week too. And nobody had said anything about GRAMA to us. About 2 weeks ago, let's see. Yeah, it would have been 2 weeks ago. The Republican who sponsored the bill, John Dewey, and I like John. John's an interesting guy, a very good guy. He's about as pure a libertarian as you're going to find. He really is a libertarian, a principled libertarian. I mean, if it were up to him, there'd be very little statute, law, regulation. I mean, he just wants the people to be free to do whatever they want to do. But John came around to various people in our caucus. He'd already talked to all the Republicans, and he said, would you be a co-sponsor on a bill to revise GRAMA? And and he didn't come to me. I'm glad he didn't come to me. But he went to a number of other Democrats in our caucus and said, would you do this? And they said, well, what's the bill? And he said, well, we're drafting the language right now. We don't have the language drafted. But we're increasing transparency. And I don't know what else he said to them because he didn't talk to me. But a number of our colleagues, my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle said they knew John, and John's a pretty straight shooter. And they said, yeah, sure, I'll co-sponsor that. Big mistake. Finally, last week, I mean literally just last week, I think it was on Tuesday or Wednesday, not of this week that we just went through, but the week before, the bill comes out with language. And we can see exactly what the language of the bill is. It's a 50-page bill. It's 1,800 lines of text, very detailed and complex. And everybody kind of looks at it and says, well, what does this say? And John says, oh, it says this, that, and the other, and he gives a very summary explanation. But the Republicans had already been primed to pass this bill. I mean, their leadership had said, this is an important bill to us. You need to vote for the bill. So all the Republicans were lined up to vote for it. Went through a committee hearing. The press was, I don't know how they became aware of it as quickly as they did, but they became aware of it immediately and went through it. And the committee meeting that we had in the House, I wasn't on the committee that heard the bill, but the committee meeting had about 5 or 6, maybe even 10 witnesses come and testify. All of them were against the bill. And most of them were from the media. The media had a chance to go through it. And the bill said things like, in the past, what is subject to being requested and produced is based on content. If you have any written communication and it's about legislative affairs, that's subject to being produced under GRAMA if somebody asks for it. It's simple. It's just a very straightforward disclosure statute. It's a great thing. The new bill said, well, we're going to ignore what the substance of the communications is, and we're going to carve out some types of communications that you can't even get access to. Text messages was one. You can't get access under GRAMA to text, under this bill, to text messaging. And they said, well, the reason we did that with text messaging is because that's a relatively new type of communication. When GRAMA was first passed back in 1991, no one was texting at all. So, you know, we're just saying you can't get to that stuff. Well, let me tell you, I get a lot of text messages, and I send out a fair number of text messages. There's a lot that happens with text messages. A lot. And there's a lot that can happen with text messages in terms of substantive communications and deals being made and promises being made and stuff like that. So that was a problem. Twitter accounts, I think, was another category of communication. They just said, it's not even going to fall under the statute. You just can't get to that stuff. So that was a real concern. There was also a part of the statute that talked about how if individuals or groups request information, the cost of our staff, by our staff I mean the Legislative Research and General Counsel's Office, full-time employees of the state, their cost of their time and energy in going through and getting the records, the media has to share a greater proportion of the cost of doing that. And actually the media has said, well look, as long as these provisions are reasonable, that doesn't give us too much heartburn. You know, we understand that we can't just overburden these folks. And that doesn't give me too much heartburn. When individuals ask for stuff, I'm not so sure that you should have to bear the cost of getting it if it's a voluminous amount of material, because it's going to discourage you from asking for anything at all. So I differentiate between citizen requests from media requests. So anyway, that was another part of GRAMA. And it had 2 or 3 other provisions that aren't as important, but those are the things that really I struggle with. But this bill came to the committee, passed the committee unanimously, even though the only comments on it were negative. The only comments from the public were, this is crazy, don't do this. The committee just passed it unanimously. Came to us in the House the next day. And I looked at this and said, I don't think so. And folks within the media community had contacted me and said, this is a bad bill. And I looked at it and I said, yeah, I agree, this is a bad bill. But I saw that there were a number of my peers, Democrats, who were co-sponsors of the bill. And I went to them and I said, what's this all about? Jan Seelig, who sits right next to me, she's the minority whip. She co-sponsored, and I said, what's that all about? She said, Dougal said that it was a good bill and I should be the co-sponsor of it. And so I did co-sponsor it, but she said, I don't have a problem flipping my vote and voting against it now. And she did vote against it. But a couple of the Democrats voted for it. All the Republicans voted for it. Flew through the House. Goes to the Senate hearing the next day, and it gets a Senate committee hearing that day. Gets a vote by the Senate that day. That was Friday, I think, and the same thing happened. The Senate had all the Republicans voting for it, most or all of the Democrats voting against it. And it went to the governor. This was on Friday. Went to the governor for his signature. It was about 5:30, 6 o'clock. And I was talking to some of the staff in the House. We worked late that night until about 6 or 7. And they said that the governor had gone home. And he was going to take the weekend to think about it. And I thought, oh, thank heavens. Because maybe over the weekend there can be some pressure brought to bear on Governor Herbert. And fortunately there was. The media is all over this, as you know, and the Salt Lake Tribune had a front page editorial on it, and I mean, people were upset. And we started hearing from regular folks like you guys, you know, and thankfully, that was enough to cause the governor to come back on Monday, this last Monday, earlier in the week, and say to the legislative leaders, I don't really like this bill too much. And people like Carl Wimmer and other conservatives who were looking out for their own political hide had started to turn. That heard from people, that heard from the media, and Carl Wimmer tweeted, I saw his tweet message that said something like, I've heard my constituents. I am going to talk to the governor. You go, Carl. I mean, I just thought, come on, give me a break. So he claims he went and talked to the governor, and I'm sure he did, and other people went and talked to the governor. The governor came back to us on Monday, I think it was, as legislative leaders and spoke to us on both sides of the aisle and said, guys, I'm getting a lot of flack on this bill. Tell you what, I'm going to veto this thing unless you agree, you take it back and reconsider the bill and change the enactment date, because the enactment date was immediate. Most bills, you have to, once they pass the legislature and they're signed by the governor, they don't actually go into effect for 60 days. This bill went into effect immediately, and you can do that if the 2/3 of both bodies pass a bill. And the statute, and the bill says, if that constitutional majority, 2/3 of each body pass the bill, it'll be effective immediately upon the bill. It'll be effective immediately upon the governor signing. That was another thing that really made the media unhappy. So the governor came back and said, all right, 2/3 passed the bill, but I am not going to sign it unless you delay the implementation date. You have to delay the implementation date, number one. Number two, come up with a task force or a study group to really look at this. And number three, come back before the implementation date, which he suggested would be July 1st. And I'll call you into a special session and we'll look at this again, because I just am absolutely confident that there's some things that need to be changed. And that's what legislative leadership agreed to do. So Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember when, earlier this week, it went back through the Senate and back through the House, and the only change that was made was the implementation date is now July 1st. But legislative leadership and the governor have agreed that we'll have a special session probably in June to go back and look at this a little more. And in the meantime, there'll be some negotiations with the media. And we'll, of course, take input and get information from regular folks about, hey, look, we don't like this for this reason or that reason. We don't like that part of the bill or this part of the bill. So I would encourage you to let the governor and let your representative or your senator and your senator in the legislature know how you feel. It's a terrible bill. There's no question that it's going to make it easier for our legislature to do stuff behind closed doors and have you never find out about it. I mean, there's no question about that.
Is there anything good in the bill?
Well, when you ask if there's anything good in the bill, the only thing that I'd say I think would be good in the bill is that it does put in there provisions that require the media to be a part of this cost-shifting process. It puts in there a disincentive for people or the media to just put out a blanket request for information that could constitute hundreds of thousands of pages of documents and take hundreds of hours of our time, the staff time, to find without having some provision where those who are asking for that information share in the cost of getting it. I don't think that's a bad thing. The costs have to be reasonable. It's a fine balancing act between reasonable costs and costs that are so high that they deter anyone. And as again I say, I distinguish between the kind of costs that KSL or the Tribune would have to bear when they ask for a lot of information from the kind of costs that the regular citizen would bear when they ask for information too. So, but that's really the only thing I think is good.
Is there a set fee for the cost, or is there just a
stay in the building? I can't remember. I mean, I looked at that, but off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how they come up with that. And I think it may distinguish between, as I say, institutions or businesses that ask for information and regular folks who ask for it.
What about nonprofit organizations?
Or nonprofits.
I mean, do they fall under that regular fund?
Probably. But I can't tell you that I know off the top of my head.
Because I belong
Privacy
to
concern.
where I'm rich.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Surely, if you were able to, you turned on Gov, that's public.
Right.
If you want to talk about your family, You don't want it public.